The halls of Orbital Station 4 were cold, and they were built from metal that never knew warmth. The walls stretched high above, disappearing into shadows where the lights could not reach. Everything about this place was designed to make visitors feel small and afraid. Lieutenant Park walked through these halls with her head held high. Her wrists were locked in energy cuffs that hummed with a soft blue glow. 2 guards marched on either side of her, their scaled hands gripping her arms. Their fingers were rough against her skin, but she did not flinch. She would not give them that satisfaction. They were a proud species. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, with green scales covering their bodies and yellow eyes that never seemed to blink. They had ruled this sector of space for 300 years, and they had never let anyone forget it. Their empire stretched across 40 star systems, and they treated every other species as either servants or pets. Was neither. She was human, and humans had a way of surprising people. The guards pushed her through a massive doorway into the tribunal chamber. The room was circular, with seats rising in tiers around a central platform. Hundreds of officers sat in those seats, their yellow eyes fixed on the small human woman being dragged before them. At the far end of the room, on a raised platform of polished black stone, sat Commander. Was tall even by standards. His scales were darker than most, almost black in the dim light, and a long scar ran down the left side of his face. He wore the golden armor of a senior commander, and medals covered his chest like scales of a different kind. When he smiled, his teeth were sharp and white. He was smiling now. "Lieutenant Park of the Terran Diplomatic Corps," announced. His voice was deep and carried easily through the chamber. "You stand accused of violating Section 19 of the Galactic Accord, unauthorized contact with a protected species. How do you answer?" Stood on the cold platform, her back straight and her eyes forward. She looked at without fear. "I gave food and medicine to dying children. If that is a crime, then your laws are broken, not me." A murmur ran through the crowd. Several officers shifted in their seats. No one spoke to Commander like that. No one. Smile did not fade. If anything, it grew wider. "The species you contacted were they are classified as pre-industrial primitives. Their world has been designated a preservation zone for the past 2 centuries. No outside contact is permitted. This is not a suggestion. It is the law." "Their supply transport crashed on my patrol route," said. Her voice was calm and steady. "There were 37 of them, mostly children. They had no food, no clean water, and half of them were sick with fever. Was I supposed to watch them die?" "Yes," said simply. "That is exactly what you were supposed to do. The preservation laws exist for a reason. We do not interfere with primitive species. We let nature take its course." "Nature did not crash their transport. Your shipping lanes did. Your traffic control systems failed them. They were dying because of the Empire's mistakes, not nature." The chamber went silent. Every eye was on now, waiting to see how he would respond. The scar on his face seemed to darken as his jaw tightened. "You are brave, human," he said slowly, "or perhaps just foolish. Either way, it does not matter. The tribunal has already reached its verdict. You are guilty." He stood from his seat and walked to the edge of the platform, looking down at like a predator studying its prey. "The standard punishment for your crime is 20 years in a labor camp. However, given your role as a diplomatic officer, we have decided to show mercy." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "You will be exiled, transported to Prime and left there. No technology, no supplies, no communication devices. You will live among the beasts you love so much." Laughter rippled through the chamber. Officers nudged each other and made comments in low voices. The message was clear. This was not mercy. This was a death sentence wrapped in pretty words. Prime was a harsh world. The days were hot and dry. The nights were freezing cold. Dangerous predators roamed the forests and food was scarce. They themselves were small creatures, barely 3 feet tall, with soft golden fur and large eyes. They lived in simple villages and used stone tools. By galactic standards, they were helpless. A human woman alone on that world would not survive long. Everyone in the chamber knew it. That was the point. "Do you have anything to say?" asked. His voice was thick with amusement. Looked up at him. For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly she smiled. It was not a frightened smile. It was not a defeated smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something that no one else in the room understood. "They are not beasts," she said quietly. "They are people. They have families and stories and dreams. They remember kindness and they remember cruelty." She paused. "I hope you remember that, Commander. I hope you remember it for a very long time." Stared at her. Something flickered in his yellow eyes just for a moment. Then it was gone, replaced by cold contempt. "Take her away," he ordered. The guards grabbed arms and began dragging her toward the door. As she passed through the rows of watching officers, she heard their whispers and their laughter. She heard them making bets on how long she would last. 3 days, a week, maybe 2 if she was lucky. She did not look at any of them. She kept her eyes forward, her chin raised, her steps steady. At the door she paused and looked back one final time. Her eyes found across the crowded chamber. He was already talking to his officers, already forgetting about her. She was nothing to him, a minor problem that had been solved. Watched him for a moment longer. Then she turned and walked through the door, leaving the cold halls of Station 4 behind. She did not know what waited for her on Prime. She did not know if she would survive the first night or the first week, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The shuttle dropped from the sky like a stone. It did not slow down until the last possible moment, when the pilot pulled up hard and let the craft hover just above a frozen hillside. The rear door opened with a harsh mechanical sound, and 2 guards threw out onto the hard ground. She landed badly, rolling across rocks and dead grass until she came to a stop at the edge of a steep drop. For a moment, she lay there, catching her breath and testing her body for injuries. Nothing was broken. That was good. Behind her, the shuttle was already rising. She heard the engines roar as it climbed into the sky. She did not bother to watch it go. There was no point. It would not come back. The cold hit her first. It seeped through her thin diplomatic uniform like water through paper. Her breath came out in white clouds, and within minutes her fingers were numb. The sun hung low on the horizon, pale and weak, giving light but no warmth. Pushed herself to her feet and looked around. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh, empty way. Rolling hills covered in brown grass stretched in every direction. In the distance, she could see the dark line of a forest. Mountains rose behind the trees, their peaks white with snow. The sky was enormous, painted in shades of and purple as evening approached. It was also completely empty. No buildings, no roads, no signs of civilization at all. Took a deep breath of cold air and let it out slowly. Then she started walking toward the forest. The first night was the hardest. She found a shallow cave in the hillside, barely deep enough to block the wind. She gathered dry grass and piled it against the walls for insulation. She had no fire, no blankets, no food. All she could do was curl up in the corner and wait for morning. The cold was painful. It bit at her skin and made her bones ache. She did not sleep. She could not. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the temperature dropping, felt her body growing weaker. She spent the night shivering, rubbing her arms and legs to keep the blood moving, counting the minutes until dawn. When the sun finally rose, crawled out of the cave and stood in its pale light. She was hungry and exhausted, but she was alive. That was what mattered. The second day she found water. A small stream ran through a valley below her cave, its surface thin with ice. She broke through and drank deeply, ignoring the cold that made her teeth hurt. Water was life. Everything else could wait. The third day she made tools. She found a deposit of volcanic glass near the stream, black and shiny and sharp as any blade. She spent hours chipping away at it, cutting her fingers again and again until she had shaped a crude knife. It was ugly and uneven, but it had an edge. It would work. On the fourth day, she made her first kill. A fat creature that looked like a cross between a rabbit and a squirrel wandered too close to her hiding spot. She threw a rock and stunned it, then finished it with her knife. The meat was tough and stringy, but she cooked it over a small fire and ate every bite. Fire had been the key. She had spent hours rubbing sticks together, her hands raw and blistered, until finally a tiny spark caught in a nest of dry moss. She fed that spark carefully, adding small twigs and then larger branches until she had a real flame. That night, for the first time, she slept warm. A week passed. Then, too, learned the rhythms of this world. She learned which plants were safe to eat and which would make her sick. She learned where the prey animals gathered in the mornings and where the predators hunted at night. She learned to read the sky for signs of storms and to find shelter before the worst weather hit. She was surviving. Against all odds, against everything they had expected, she was surviving. It was on the 15th night that everything changed. Was sitting by her fire, roasting strips of meat on sticks, when she heard a sound from the darkness. A soft rustling, like small feet on dry leaves. She grabbed her knife and turned toward the noise, her heart pounding. 3 small shapes stood at the edge of the firelight. They were, she realized, cubs, barely older than toddlers. Their golden fur was matted and dirty, and she could see their ribs showing through their thin bodies. They stared at her with enormous eyes that reflected the flames. Lowered her knife slowly. She did not want to frighten them. One of the cubs took a hesitant step forward. He was smaller than the others, with a distinctive white patch on his left ear. Recognized him instantly. He was from the group she had helped on the crashed transport. She remembered holding him while a medic treated his fever. She remembered the way he had clutched her hand with his tiny paws. "Hello, little one," she said softly. "Do you remember me?" The cub chirped. It was a high, musical sound like a bird singing. He took another step forward, then another, until he was close enough to touch. His nose twitched as he sniffed the air, smelling the cooking meat. Looked at the 3 hungry cubs. She looked at her small supply of food. She thought about how much she needed every bite to stay alive. Then she divided her meal into 4 equal portions. "Here," she said, holding out a piece of meat to the white-eared cub. "You must be hungry." The cub took the food carefully in both paws. He sniffed it once, then stuffed it into his mouth. The other 2 cubs crept forward, their fear giving way to hunger. Fed them all. She gave them water from her supply. She let them sit by her fire and warmed their thin bodies. When they curled up together in a pile of soft fur, she covered them with the cloak she had made from animal skins. That night, for the first time since landing on this world, did not feel alone. She did not know it then, but those 3 small cubs would change everything. They were the first threads in a web that would eventually trap Commander himself. But that night, they were just 3 hungry children who needed help. And Park had never been able to turn away from someone who needed help. It was, after all, the very thing that had brought her here. The 3 cubs never left. Did not ask them to stay, but they did not go. When she woke each morning, they were curled up beside her fire. When she went hunting, they followed at her heels like shadows. When she ate, they sat across from her and waited for their share. She gave them names because she needed something to call them. The smallest one with the white ear became. The female with the dark stripe down her back became. The quiet one who watched everything with careful eyes became. At first, thought she was taking care of them. She taught them how to find water. She showed them which berries were safe to eat. She protected them from the cold nights and the dangerous predators. But slowly, she realized that they were teaching her too. Showed her a cave system that ran beneath the hills. It was warm inside, heated by underground springs, and it had fresh water that never froze. Led her to a grove of trees that grew sweet nuts all year round. taught her to read the movement of birds to know when storms were coming. They were clever, far more clever than the Empire had ever realized. They did not have machines or computers. They did not build cities or fly ships between stars, but they knew their world in ways that was only beginning to understand. They knew every plant and animal, every stream and cave, every secret that the land held. They had survived on this harsh planet for thousands of years without any technology at all. And they could learn. That was what surprised most of all. Within weeks, the cubs were speaking to her, not in full sentences at first, just simple words mixed with their chirps and gestures. Food, water, danger. But their vocabulary grew every day. They picked up new words like children everywhere pick up new words quickly and eagerly. By the second month, could hold a simple conversation. Mother, she said one morning, had tried to explain that she was not their mother, but the cubs had decided otherwise. Why you here? Why alone? Thought carefully about how to answer. She did not want to lie to them, but she also did not want to frighten them with talk of empires and punishments. I helped your people, she said finally. The ones in the crashed ship, do you remember? His ears flattened. I remember I was sick, you gave medicine. Yes, but the ones who rule the sky, they did not want me to help you. They said I broke their rules, so they sent me here as punishment. Tilted her head, thinking about this. They punish you for helping. Yes. That is stupid, said firmly. Laughed. It was the first time she had laughed since arriving on this world. Yes, yes, it is. The months passed and the seasons changed. The harsh winter gave way to a brief spring, then a hot, dry summer. Cave became a proper home. She built walls from stones and covered them with mud to keep out the wind. She made beds from dried grass and furs. She created storage spaces for food and water. The cubs grew. They were no longer the thin, starving creatures she had found by her fire. They were strong and healthy, their fur thick and glossy. They had learned to hunt and gather, to make tools and set traps. They had learned to speak her language almost as well as their own. And they had told others about her. It happened gradually. First, an adult appeared at the edge of their camp. He watched for a long time, then disappeared back into the forest. The next week, 2 more came, then 5, then a dozen. They did not speak to her at first. They only watched, but noticed that they brought gifts. A basket of nuts left outside her cave, a bundle of dried meat hanging from a tree, a warm blanket woven from plant fibers. She accepted the gifts and left her own in return. Food she had gathered, tools she had made, medicine she had created from plants the cubs had shown her. One morning in late summer, shook her awake just after dawn. Mother, the young said, her voice was excited. Others come, many you must see. Followed the cubs out of the cave and up a steep path to a ridge overlooking the valley below. What she saw there made her stop and stare. Hundreds had gathered in the valley. They stood in neat rows, families grouped together, elders at the front. There were adults and children, males and females, young and old. Some carried spears. Some carried baskets of goods. All of them were looking up at the ridge where stood. An elderly stepped forward from the crowd. His fur was silver with age, and he walked slowly with the help of a carved wooden staff. But his eyes were bright and sharp, and when he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the still morning air. You are, he said. His words were careful and slow, each one pronounced with obvious effort. Someone had been teaching him her language. You fed our young when they starved. You gave medicine when sickness took us. The Empire calls us beasts. They say we are animals. They say we do not think, do not feel, do not remember. He paused and looked directly at her. But we remember. We remember everything. We remember the ship that crashed. We remember the children who were dying. We remember the human who risked everything to save them. The old bowed his head. Behind him, every single one of the hundreds of gathered did the same. You are not outsider, the elder continued. You are not stranger, you are pack now, you are family. From this day until your last day, you are one of us. Your enemies are our enemies. Your home is our home. Your children are our children. Felt tears running down her face. She did not try to stop them. She stepped forward off the ridge and walked down the slope toward the waiting crowd. And walked beside her, their small paws finding easy holds on the rocky ground. When she reached the elder, she knelt before him, bringing her face level with his. "Thank you," she said softly. "I do not deserve this." The old reached out and touched her cheek with one gentle paw. "You saved our children," he said simply. "You deserve everything." That night there was a celebration. Fires burned throughout the valley, and they sang songs that had been passed down for 1,000 generations. They danced and feasted and told stories under the stars. And in the center of it all, surrounded by hundreds of small golden bodies, sat a human woman who had come to this world as a prisoner and had become something far more important. She had become family. Far away, in the cold halls of Station 4, Commander slept peacefully, never knowing what was growing on the world he had forgotten. But he would learn. Soon enough he would learn. 8 months had passed since Commander had sentenced Park to exile. In that time he had not thought about her once. She was gone. Dead, most likely, eaten by predators or frozen in some forgotten corner of that primitive world. It did not matter. She was a problem that had been solved. Had more important things on his mind. The survey reports had come back 3 weeks ago. Detailed scans of Prime had revealed something extraordinary. Beneath the northern ice shelf lay massive deposits of one of the rarest and most valuable minerals in the galaxy. A single ton of was worth more than an entire fleet of warships. The deposits on Prime could be worth trillions. Of course, there was the small matter of the preservation laws. Prime was a protected world. No mining, no development, no industrial activity of any kind. But laws could be changed, especially when the right people stood to make the right amount of money. Had already begun the process. A few quiet conversations with senior officials, a few generous donations to the right politicians. Soon, very soon, the preservation status would be revoked, and when that happened would be ready. But first, he needed to conduct an official survey. Just a small team, just a quick visit to confirm the readings. Everything had to be documented properly if the legal challenges were going to be defeated. His shuttle entered the atmosphere of Prime on a bright morning in early autumn. The sky was clear and blue, and the forests below were painted in shades of gold and red. It was almost beautiful, admitted to himself. A shame it would all have to be cleared for mining equipment. The pilot sat down in a large clearing near the forest edge. It was the same area where they had dropped the human woman 8 months ago, had chosen it deliberately. He wanted to see if anything remained of her. A skeleton, perhaps, something to bring back as a trophy. He stepped out of the shuttle with 6 guards at his back. They were heavily armed, carrying energy rifles and wearing full combat armor. Overkill for a simple survey mission, but believed in being prepared. Readings show the deposits are approximately 12 kilometers north, his technician reported, studying a handheld scanner. The terrain is rough but passable. We should be able to. The technician stopped speaking. His mouth hung open as he stared at something behind. Turned. Shapes were emerging from the tree line. At first he thought they were animals, just the primitive creatures that lived on this world. But then he saw the spears. He saw the bows. He saw the blades of volcanic glass that gleamed in the morning light. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. They stepped out from behind trees and rose up from hidden positions in the tall grass. They formed a wide semicircle around the shuttle, blocking every possible escape route. They were organized. They moved with military precision, and they were very, very angry. His hand moved toward his sidearm. Before his fingers touched the grip, 3 arrows were pointed at his throat. The archers had not even seemed to draw. One moment their bows were at their sides, and the next, the arrows were ready to fly. "I would not do that if I were you, Commander." The voice was human, familiar. Watched in disbelief as the crowd parted like water, a figure walked through the gap they created. She wore a cloak made from animal furs and a circlet of woven silver grass. Her hair was longer than he remembered, and her skin was tanned dark from months in the sun. But her eyes were the same, calm, patient, unafraid. Park stopped a few meters away from him and smiled. "What a surprise," she said pleasantly. "I did not expect visitors." Found his voice. It came out rough and uncertain, nothing like the smooth command he usually projected. "You are alive." "Yes, sorry to disappoint you." "This is impossible. You should be dead. No human could survive on this world without technology." Looked around at the hundreds of warriors surrounding them. "I had help." One of his guards raised his rifle, aiming at the nearest. Instantly, a dozen more arrows swung toward him. The guard froze. "Tell your men to put down their weapons," said. Her voice was still calm, almost friendly. "No one needs to die today." Hesitated. His mind was racing, trying to understand what had happened, trying to find a way out of this situation. He had 6 guards with energy weapons. They had arrows and spears. By all logic, his team should have the advantage. But he looked at the faces of the warriors. He saw no fear there. He saw no hesitation. These were not the primitive animals he had been told about. These were soldiers. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they were ready to die doing it. "Stand down," ordered quietly. His guards lowered their weapons. Several moved forward and collected them, handling the advanced technology with obvious curiosity. "Now," said, "let us talk." She led him away from the shuttle, into the forest. 2 warriors walked on either side of him, their spears never more than a few inches from his body. Behind him, he could hear his crew being separated and taken in different directions. They walked for perhaps half an hour before reaching a village. It was larger than had expected. Proper buildings made from stone and wood, gardens growing vegetables, children playing in a central square. And everywhere stopped what they were doing to stare at him. Their large eyes held no warmth. Brought him to a building near the center of the village. Inside, there was a simple wooden table and 2 chairs. She sat in one and gestured for him to take the other. "You look confused," she said. "You have trained them, managed, organized them, built weapons." "I taught them a few things. They taught me many more. It turns out that being primitive does not mean being stupid. They have been surviving on this world for 20,000 years. They know things about strategy and cooperation that your empire has forgotten. The empire will send soldiers, warships. They will burn this world to ash." Leaned forward. "Will they? To protect a mining operation that has not even started. To avenge a survey team that was simply turned away. I do not think so, Commander. I think the Empire will do what empires always do. They will calculate the cost and decide it is not worth paying." Stared at her. "What do you want?" "I want you to leave. I want you to go back to your station and report that the mineral survey was inconclusive. I want you to recommend that the preservation status of Prime be made permanent." "And if I refuse?" His expression did not change. "Then you will stay here, you and your crew. You will live among the beasts you think so little of. You will learn to survive without your technology, without your weapons, without your precious empire." She paused. "Or you will not survive at all. The choice is yours." Sat in silence for a long moment. He thought about his career, his reputation, the fortune he stood to lose if the mining operation failed. He thought about the shame of returning to Station 4 empty-handed. Then he thought about spending the rest of his life on this world, surrounded by creatures who had every reason to hate him. "I will need my shuttle," he said finally. Smiled. "Of course. But first, you will spend the night here. My cubs have prepared a special welcome for you. It would be rude to leave before experiencing their hospitality. Something cold settled in stomach. "Cubs?" he asked. Smile widened. "You will meet them soon enough." They gave Commander a small hut at the edge of the village. It had a bed of dried grass, a wooden stool, and nothing else. 2 guards stood outside the door, their spears crossed to prevent any escape, not that there was anywhere to escape to. His crew had been separated and placed in similar huts throughout the village. They were not harmed. They were given food and water, but their weapons were gone, their communicators confiscated, and their shuttle sat dark and silent in the clearing. Lay on the uncomfortable bed and stared at the ceiling. The humiliation burned in his chest like acid. He was commander of the Empire. He had conquered worlds. He had broken rebellions. He had made senators and admirals tremble at the sound of his name. And now he was a prisoner of creatures that his own government classified as animals. Sleep came slowly, but eventually it came. He woke to find his boots missing. Sat up and looked around the hut. The door was still closed. The guards were still outside. But his boots, the expensive custom boots that had been made for him by the finest craftsmen on Prime, were gone. He stood and searched the small space. Nothing. They had simply vanished. The guards claimed to have seen nothing. Their faces showed no expression, but could have sworn he saw amusement in their large eyes. He spent the rest of that day barefoot, feeling foolish and angry. That night he kept his remaining possessions close: his uniform jacket, his belt, his scanner which had returned to him without its power cell. He piled everything on the bed beside him and lay down, determined to stay awake. He lasted perhaps 2 hours before exhaustion took him. When he woke, his jacket was gone. Scrambled up, his heart pounding. The jacket had contained his identification codes, his personal data chip, everything that proved who he was. Without it, he was just another nameless on a primitive world. "How?" he demanded of the guards. "I was right here. How did they take it?" The guards said nothing. One of them made a small sound that might have been a cough, or might have been a laugh. The 3rd night his belt disappeared. The 4th, his scanner. By the 5th night had been reduced to his basic undergarments, a thin shirt and his trousers. He had lost weight from the simple food they fed him. He had not bathed properly in days. He looked like a vagrant, not a commander. And every morning, when he stumbled out of the hut, he saw them. 3 young sitting on a nearby fence, watching him with bright, curious eyes. The smallest one had a white patch on his ear. The female had a dark stripe down her back. The quiet one clutched a familiar belt in his small paws. They were playing with his possessions, wearing his boots, far too large for their tiny feet, draping his jacket around their shoulders like a cape, taking everything apart and putting it back together, fascinated by the strange alien technology. Tried to grab them once. He lunged toward the fence, hands outstretched, certain he could catch at least one. They scattered like leaves in the wind. Within seconds they were gone, vanished into the tall grass and the shadows between buildings. All that remained was the echo of their chirping laughter. By the 6th morning, could not take it any more. He found sitting by a stream at the edge of the village, watching the water flow over smooth stones. She did not look up when he approached, though she surely knew he was there. "Please," he said, his voice cracked on the word, "make them stop." Picked up a pebble and tossed it into the stream. "Make who stop?" "The cubs, your cubs. They have taken everything. I have nothing left. Last night I woke to find one of them measuring my trousers with a piece of string. I think they plan to take those too." "They might," agreed calmly. "Has been talking about making a flag. She thinks your trousers would make excellent material." Fell to his knees beside her. He had not knelt before anyone in 30 years of military service. But his legs simply gave out, and suddenly he was on the ground, looking up at the human woman who had once been his prisoner. "Please," he said again, "I will do what you asked. I will report that the survey found nothing. I will recommend permanent preservation status. I will never come back to this world. Just please, please make them stop." Finally turned to look at him. Her expression was thoughtful, almost sad. "You sent me here to die," she said quietly. "You laughed when you did it. You called the beasts animals, creatures not worth protecting. I was wrong." "Yes, you were," was silent for a moment. 8 months ago I had nothing. No food, no shelter, no hope. I thought I would die in the first week. Do you know what saved me?" Shook his head. 3 hungry children who remembered that I had once shown them kindness, looked back at the stream. "The do not forget, Commander. They remember every cruelty and every kindness. They remember for generations. Your empire has been cruel to them for 200 years. They remember all of it. But they have not killed me." "No, because I asked them not to," stood and brushed the dirt from her clothes. "I told them that you were not worth killing. I told them that the best punishment was not death, but humiliation. Let him go home small and scared and empty-handed. Let him spend the rest of his life knowing that he was defeated by the creatures he thought were worthless." She looked down at him with something that might have been pity. "The cubs wanted to help. They are very creative when it comes to making people uncomfortable. I believe has plans for your remaining clothes that involve a ceremonial bonfire." Made a sound somewhere between a whimper and a groan. "However," continued, "I am not cruel, not even to you. If you give me your word that you will do as I asked, I will tell the cubs to return your things." "You have my word, I swear it, whatever you want." Nodded slowly. "Then we have an agreement." She turned and walked toward the village, calling out something in the language. Within moments, 3 small shapes appeared from various hiding spots around the clearing. They toward her, chirping and chattering. Watched as spoke to them in low tones. He saw their ears droop with disappointment. He heard protest loudly in her own language, gesturing with her small paws. But eventually, all 3 cubs nodded and bounded away. 10 minutes later, they returned carrying his possessions: boots, jacket, belt, scanner, even his identification codes slightly chewed around the edges. They dumped everything in a pile at his feet and stood watching him with accusing eyes. "Mother says we must give back," said in careful, practiced words. "But we think you deserve much worse." "We remember what you did to her," added. "We will always remember." "If you come back," said quietly, "we will not be so kind." They turned and walked away without looking back. An hour later, shuttle lifted off from the clearing. From the window, he could see hundreds of gathered below, watching him leave. At their center, 3 small cubs waved cheerfully, as if saying goodbye to an old friend. And beside them, Park raised a single hand in farewell. Her face showed no anger, no triumph, just quiet satisfaction. Turned away from the window and ordered maximum speed back to space. 6 months later, the Preservation Act was passed by the Senate. It granted the species full protected status forever. No mining, no development, no contact of any kind. Commander retired from military service shortly afterward. He never spoke publicly about what had happened on Prime, but those who knew him said that he was never quite the same. He flinched at sudden movements. He slept with the lights on. And he never ever took off his boots. Park remained on Prime for the rest of her life. She was offered pardons, promotions, honors of every kind. She declined them all. "I have a pack now," she told the Terran ambassador who came to deliver the offers. "They need me, and I need them." Fully grown now, stood at her shoulder. Her eyes were bright with intelligence and love. "Besides," added, scratching the young behind her ear, "someone has to teach the next generation how to steal boots properly." The ambassador laughed, but as his shuttle rose into the sky, he found himself wondering about the future, about what would happen when these creatures, these supposedly primitive beasts, began to reach for the stars. He suspected it would be very interesting indeed. And somewhere in the forests of Prime, Three cubs who had once been starving orphans looked up at the departing ship and imagined all the adventures that awaited them. Their mother had come from the stars. Someday, perhaps, they would go there too. But that is a story for another time.